Question. So the first one is that transition being very difficult. Absolutely. Building a house from scratch is much easier than renovating a house. The point about employees, though, you can put the same employee in two different settings where work is designed differently. That same employee will generate very different results. In fact, it's not really, employee skills are not constant. They grow. What they can do grow, how much value they can add is a function of how you invest in them. I have a great example of this with a manufacturing example where GM used to have a factory. And it was a unionized plant, and it did horribly. And it was known for very bad quality, not ignition problems, not at that time, lots of problems. The plant closed. A couple years later, GM and Toyota did a joint venture together in the same location. They hired the same people with the same union. The same employees delivered very different outcomes because of the way that Toyota designs the jobs. So I think, and one final thing is that of the 4 model companies that I have, one of them did not start out as a good jobs strategy company. Mercadona was just a typical supermarket chain in Spain. They offered lots of products, they offered lots of promotions, they offered bad jobs, unpredictable schedules. But then larger chains came into Spain. And Mercadona realized they had around 100 stores at the time. We had to do something different to compete against larger companies. And they changed their whole strategy around and implemented the good job strategy. So change is hard, but it's doable. And not every employee, I imagine, survived. Just like in the GM Toyota story, I imagine not every employee survived. But it's not just employees, it's how you design the work for them.
Hi, I'm Mike Sogard from Indianapolis. 2 questions. Do you see a difference between public companies and private companies? And also in training, 7,000 or 8,000 products is a large number of products. How do they do product training?
Yes, so I have studied public and private companies. Of the 4 model retailers, only one of them is a public company, which is Costco. The other 3 are private companies. And public companies are able to resist the temptation to lower their employee investment even when they don't meet their quarterly targets. So it can be done at a public company. Your second question about 9,000 SKUs. So in a Mercadona store, not every employee knows everything about 9,000 SKUs. So this is where you see the benefit of specialization. So you are a vegetables and fruit specialist. You know everything in that area. You're cross-trained to perform lots of functions, but you learn about products in that area. And every time they introduce a new product, they communicate that information to the employees and tell them what the products are like.
Do they do that personally, or videos, the internet? How do you learn about 15 tomatoes?
So they have every week. They don't offer 15 new products every time, but every week they receive a set of documents that goes through everything that they offered. They have supervisors that work very closely with them, and they talk about that. But it's different in different companies.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I thought it was spectacular, and I'm wondering, your work is focused mainly on how to change the logic of how business leaders think about the road to success. There are other paths to creating good jobs that involve public policy change, that change the terms and nature of work, and action by workers themselves to bargain with employers. So how do those fit into your view of how we get to the promised land on this?
I think if there are certain policies, for example, if there's a policy that you have to offer your employees their schedules 3 weeks in advance as opposed to 1 week in advance, if there's a new policy that minimum wages have to increase, those could act as constraints. And now companies would be more encouraged to implement the good job strategy because now that they have to invest more in their workers, they will want to get more out of their workers. So I'm hoping that the changes in the public policy space will encourage more companies to adopt this strategy. But I'm just an operations person. I'm not a public policy person.
You touched on unions in your comment about GM Toyota. And I run a very large service company with over 50,000 employees who are relatively low wage earners. Do you see a challenge of unionization to employing a good job strategy?
I think if the unions move from collective bargaining to implementing a strategy in which everybody wins, I don't see unions as being a barrier to implementing this strategy. Does that?
Yeah, it's a challenge.
It's
a challenge if you're trying to implement. I completely buy into your theory here. But it's a challenge when you're trying to do the best thing, and then you have this other force comes in, which is not really aligned with the employer. It's aligned solely with the employee.
Yeah.
So I would say that it could create tremendous challenges from the corporate level trying to put in the right strategy, the right program.
It requires more work. It requires more work, but it's not necessarily a barrier. It could be, yes, it could be done.
So I'm curious about how this strategy works for small businesses, especially because with lower income earning people, even if you increase the salary by certain percentages, it will still be low. So I'm curious, one, with the companies that you looked at that are employing the good job strategy, was it like an HR haven where everybody really was totally happy with their salaries, or does it get to a point where they still feel like they deserve more just because they've become used to what they're already getting?
So that's a great question, and I think some of the examples that I gave might be intimidating for small business owners. When I say Mercadona invests 5,000 euros per person in training, I imagine that a lot of small businesses may not be able to afford that type of investment or even the salaries. But the important thing is, the virtuous cycle that I showed is really a cycle. But it starts with a mentality that employees are a strategic asset, and we can use our employees to reduce costs to increase sales. If you start with that mentality and your employees know about that mentality, then as you do better, you could give more and more to the employees. This virtuous cycle continues. So remember that the virtuous cycle is a cycle, and it's a work in progress.